All right, so we're back and we're ready to jump right back into things. Today, we're going to try to get a handle on what's happening over in the Middle East. Things in Gaza and Lebanon. I mean, it's just spiraling, isn't it?
It's a lot to process. Just a truly complex situation.
Exactly. I mean, just to give everyone a sense of what we're working with here, we've got the latest updates coming in live from Al Jazeera and TRT World. Plus, we've got this really in-depth article from Anadolu Agency to kind of give us the bigger picture, you know?
Those live updates, especially, are going to be crucial. Things are changing so rapidly that, by the time some of these articles are published, they're already outdated.
Yeah, trying to keep up is like trying to catch the wind. So I guess the mission here, if you want to call it that, is to really break down these key developments and get to the heart of the human impact. And then maybe, hopefully, we can even start to figure out what this all means for the region as a whole.
It's a tall order,
yeah,
but I think having these sources, it's a good starting point for sure.
Absolutely. So let's start with Gaza. I mean, it just seems like this humanitarian crisis is getting worse by the hour. The latest report from the Gaza Health Ministry, I mean, it's just staggering. They're reporting 35 more Palestinians killed just in the last 24 hours. And that brings the total since October 7th of last year to over 44,211.
Oh, wow. It's hard to even fathom that number, that many lives lost.
Yeah, and Al Jazeera is reporting that there are these severe shortages of food, medicine, just basic necessities. I mean, Gaza's been under this blockade for years, which has already made things incredibly difficult.
Right.
But this recent surge in violence, I mean, it's just pushing them over the edge.
It's like they were already barely hanging on, and now it's a truly catastrophic situation.
Exactly. Their correspondent, Hind Kudori, is reporting from Deir el-Balah in central Gaza. And she says people are struggling to even get one meal a day. Even if they can find food, it's just too expensive for most people to afford.
So you have this double whammy of scarcity and economic hardship.
Yeah, it's like
just crushing people from both sides.
It's this horrible ripple effect, isn't it? And the medical situation, I mean, it's just as bad, if not worse. Kuderi also talked about this hospital director in northern Gaza who was seriously injured in an attack on the Kamal Adwan hospital. But because of the shortages, they don't even have the resources to treat him properly.
It's like a nightmare scenario. I mean, not only are healthcare facilities being targeted, which, by the way, is absolutely horrific.
Absolutely.
But even when someone is injured, they can't even get the care they need.
It's just adding insult to injury, really.
Yeah, and the Kamal Adwan hospital, it's the only functioning one in northern Gaza.
Right.
So you're talking about depriving an entire population. I mean, just cutting them off from essential medical care.
And to make matters even worse, TRT World is reporting that Israeli forces have issued new evacuation orders for Gaza City's Shujaiya neighborhood. Hundreds of Palestinians are being forced to flee their homes in the dark with just a few belongings.
I mean, imagine having to leave everything behind, not knowing where you're going, if you'll even be safe.
It's heartbreaking. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Lebanon. The situation there, I mean, it's just as tense. Both Al Jazeera and TRT World are reporting that Israeli attacks have intensified. The death toll now is over 3,754.
Wow, and that's since the conflict began, right?
Yeah, since it started.
The spillover of the conflict into Lebanon, I mean, it's really a dangerous escalation.
It's like throwing gasoline on an already raging fire, isn't it?
Exactly. And it really threatens to destabilize the entire region.
Absolutely. I mean, over 1 million people have been displaced. Entire villages have been just wiped out by these Israeli bombardments.
It's hard to wrap your head around that level of destruction.
I know. And the reports coming out of Lebanon, they're just devastating.
Yeah, homes, businesses, entire communities just reduced to rubble.
Al Jazeera is reporting some really fierce battles happening near Tyre. Hezbollah fighters are engaging Israeli forces in this strategic battle for control of this key hill. And Hezbollah is claiming to have forced Israeli troops to retreat.
So they're really digging in and putting up a strong defense.
Yeah, and they've even launched multiple anti-tank missiles.
That suggests a pretty high level of military capability.
Right.
And it could mean that this conflict drags on much longer than anyone anticipated.
It's not just some small skirmish, that's for sure.
No, not at all.
And they're not just fighting defensively either. Hezbollah is also striking deeper into Israeli territory. They claim to have hit a military base near Haifa with a missile salvo.
Wow.
And they've launched drone attacks on both Tel Aviv and the Ashdod naval base in southern Israel.
So it seems like their strategy is kind of two-pronged. On the one hand, they're trying to inflict as much damage as possible on Israeli infrastructure.
Right.
And on the other, they're demonstrating their firepower and their reach.
They're not messing around.
No, they're definitely sending a message.
And the Israeli response has been, well, it's been swift. Their army is reporting over 160 projectiles fired from Lebanon into their territory.
That's a lot.
Some of them even reaching Tel Aviv. Medical agencies are reporting multiple injuries, including one man in serious condition.
So it's this back and forth, this tit-for-tat escalation.
Yeah.
And it's really worrying.
It just seems like it's going to be harder and harder to break this cycle of violence.
Every attack just fuels the desire for retaliation.
Exactly. But there is some, I guess, a potential glimmer of hope amidst all of this. Al Jazeera is reporting that the U.S. is actively trying to mediate between Israel and Lebanon.
It's got to be a good sign, right?
I mean, hopefully.
I mean, the U.S. is a key ally to both sides, so their diplomatic efforts could be key.
Fingers crossed. And the EU is also getting involved. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell is calling for an immediate ceasefire in both Gaza and Lebanon. He's actually in Beirut right now, meeting with Lebanese leaders to try and figure out how to de-escalate the situation.
So the international community is definitely taking notice.
Yeah, it seems like they're really trying to find a peaceful resolution. And it's not just talk either.
Oh, yeah.
Borrell announced that they're ready to provide 200 million euros to support the Lebanese army.
That's a pretty big commitment.
Yeah.
Shows they're serious about helping to stabilize things over there.
Yeah, it's not just lip service, that's for sure. But even with all of these efforts, it's still not clear how this is all going to play out. Anadolu Agency is reporting that Borrell emphasized the need to pressure both Israel and Hezbollah to accept a U.S. proposed ceasefire, but he also acknowledged how difficult that's going to be. He even said that Lebanon is on the brink of collapse.
That's a pretty stark assessment.
Yeah,
it really underscores just how urgent this situation is.
Absolutely.
I mean, if this violence continues unchecked, the consequences for Lebanon could be just catastrophic.
And Borrell also pointed out how important Lebanon's domestic political situation is in all of this. He urged Lebanese leaders to elect a new president. They've had this 2-year power vacuum that's really been plaguing the country.
Yeah, that power vacuum is a huge problem. It just weakens their ability to respond effectively, creates uncertainty.
It's like they're trying to steer a ship with no captain.
Exactly.
So we've got this escalating violence on the one hand and these diplomatic efforts on the other, but even if a ceasefire is reached, I mean, the underlying issues are just incredibly complex.
Yeah, and to really understand what's going on here, we look beyond the headlines, beyond the statistics.
We need to hear the stories of the people who are caught in the middle of all of this.
Right, those individual experiences.
Yeah.
They can really give us a sense of the true cost of this crisis.
Absolutely. So let's take a closer look at some of those stories and see what they can tell us about the human toll of this conflict.
Yeah, it's easy to, get caught up in all the big picture stuff. But for me, it's always those individual stories that really, that really make it hit home.
Right. It reminds us that we're not just talking about numbers here, These are real people whose lives are being just torn apart.
Yeah. And those stories often reveal, like aspects of the conflict that you wouldn't necessarily grasp from just reading the headlines, for sure. Like, for instance, Al Jazeera shared this story about what was his name? Diab Mohammed Jafar. He was a 42-year-old Lebanese army soldier, and he was killed in an Israeli strike on an army center near Tyre.
Oh, wow.
And 18 other soldiers were injured in that same attack.
It just goes to show, I mean, even those in uniform, even those who are, tasked with protecting their country, they're still vulnerable.
And what's interesting here is that the Lebanese army, I mean, they're not even directly involved in the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah.
Right.
But they're still being drawn into the violence.
So it kind of makes you wonder, what is Israel's endgame here,
Yeah, I mean, are they intentionally targeting the Lebanese army? Like, are they trying to weaken them? Or is this just collateral damage? Is it just, an unintended consequence of their pursuit of Hezbollah?
Yeah, because, I mean, if the Lebanese army is seen as, unable to protect its own soldiers, I mean, couldn't that further destabilize the country?
Absolutely. It could create a power vacuum.
Yeah.
That could actually end up benefiting Hezbollah.
It's almost like, they're creating the very conditions that they're claiming to be fighting against.
Exactly. It's just this,
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And then you've got, this just heartbreaking story from TRT World about those 2 paramedics who were killed by Israeli drones while they were literally just trying to help the injured in southern Lebanon?
I mean, come on. That's just,
How can you target people who are
it's beyond the pale.
risking their lives to save others?
No, it's like, it's a complete disregard for,
for human life.
yeah, for basic humanitarian principles. And it's not an isolated incident either. I
Yeah.
mean, we're seeing this trend of medical personnel being targeted,
Right.
and they're protected under international law.
Right.
But that doesn't seem to matter.
And it's not just happening in Lebanon either. Back in Gaza, Al Jazeera shared this story about hundreds of Palestinians being evacuated from Gaza City's Shujaiya neighborhood. They had to flee in the middle of the night
Oh, wow.
with just whatever they could carry.
It's heartbreaking,
It is.
I mean, can you imagine having to leave your home,
everything you know.
everything you know, in the dark,
Yeah.
not knowing where you're going, if you'll even be safe?
And the trauma,
Oh, the trauma is just
I can't even imagine.
unthinkable.
Yeah.
And it's another layer of suffering on top of everything else they're going through.
Absolutely.
The loss of home, the disruption of life, the constant fear. It just creates this deep sense of insecurity and despair.
It's like this never-ending nightmare.
And the psychological scars of this, I mean, they're going to last for generations.
Yeah, that's what I keep thinking about. Even if the fighting stops tomorrow, the road to recovery is going to be so long.
Oh, absolutely.
Rebuilding lives, rebuilding communities.
It's not just about physical reconstruction either. It's about rebuilding trust, rebuilding hope,
And that's going to take a lot of
time,
time.
resources,
Yeah.
and most importantly, a sense of hope for the future.
And that's what's so powerful about these individual stories, They really remind us that we need to be thinking about the long-term consequences here. It's not just about this immediate crisis. It's about creating a future where these cycles of violence are broken,
Exactly.
where communities can thrive, where people can live in peace and security.
That's what we should be striving for.
Absolutely.
And speaking of the future, there are some, I guess you could say, glimmers of hope amidst all this darkness.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, while the violence is escalating, the international community is really stepping up their efforts to try to bring about a ceasefire.
Right.
The U.S. and the EU are both getting involved.
It's something, at least.
Yeah, it shows that the world is paying attention
Yeah, they're not just turning a blind eye.
and that they're trying to find a way to end the bloodshed.
But as we've been discussing,
Yeah.
The path to peace it's not going to be easy.
No, it's going to be a long and difficult road.
There's just so much mistrust.
Yeah, and so many competing interests.
Decades of unresolved grievances.
It's like trying to untangle a giant knot.
And let's not forget about the human cost, Even if the fighting stops tomorrow, the scars of this conflict, they're going to run deep.
Absolutely. Those who have lost loved ones, those who have been displaced, those whose lives have been shattered, their pain won't just disappear overnight.
No, it's going to take a long time to heal.
And that's why it's so important to remember that.
Yeah.
Peace isn't just the absence of fighting.
Right.
It's about creating the conditions for people to rebuild their lives, to heal, to have hope for a better future.
It's about more than just putting down the guns.
Exactly.
So how do you do that? How do you rebuild trust after so much bloodshed and destruction? How do you address the underlying issues that led to the conflict in the first place?
Those are the million-dollar questions, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I think they require a fundamental shift in thinking, not just from the leaders involved, but from all of us.
Right. We have to be willing to look at this.
We need to move beyond those simplistic narratives of good versus evil and start recognizing the complexities of the situation.
It's not black and white.
No, not at all.
It's about understanding the fears, the grievances, the aspirations of all sides.
It's about empathy, compassion.
Even for those we might consider our enemies.
Exactly. It's a tall order for sure.
Yeah, but I think it starts with recognizing that shared humanity, regardless of nationality, religion, political beliefs.
We all want the same things, ultimately.
Yeah, we all want peace, security, a chance for our children to live in a better world.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really the key takeaway here, this conflict. It's not just about some distant land or some foreign leaders. It's about that very human desire for peace and dignity.
It's about our shared responsibility.
Yeah.
To build a world where these kinds of tragedies are prevented.
Not just managed. I don't know. It just feels like we're at this really critical point, you know? Like a tipping point.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
We've got this escalating violence on one side, and then all these diplomatic efforts for a ceasefire on the other.
It's hard to say which way it's going to go.
It really is.
It's like watching a high wire act,
Yeah.
One wrong move and
the stakes are so high.
oh, incredibly high.
And even with the U.S. and the EU stepping in, I mean,
Hmm.
it's not going to be easy to overcome all that mistrust
No, not at all.
and all those competing interests.
You got decades of unresolved grievances, political power struggles,
Yeah.
external actors all trying to, exert their influence.
It's a mess.
It really is.
And then you've got the human cost, even if you're going to be with people for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people have lost loved ones. They've been displaced from their homes. Their lives have been completely shattered.
And that doesn't just go away overnight.
No, it takes time to heal from that kind of trauma.
And that's where things get even more complicated, right? Because how do you rebuild trust after so much bloodshed and destruction?
Exactly.
How do you address those underlying issues that, that caused this whole thing in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, that's the real challenge here. It's going to require a real shift in thinking.
From everyone.
From everyone, yeah. Not just the leaders, but from all of us.
We have to be willing to.
To look beyond those easy answers, to
Yeah.
move beyond those simplistic narratives of good guys and bad guys.
Because it's just not that simple.
It's much more nuanced than that.
We have to try to understand, the fears, the grievances.
Aspirations.
It's about empathy. It's about compassion.
Even for those,
Yeah.
who we might see as our enemies.
Yeah, exactly. Because at the end of the day, we all share this common humanity.
We all want the same things, really.
We want peace, we want security, we want a better future for our children. And I think that's what I really want our listeners to take away from this, This conflict, it's not just about some far-off place. It's about all of us.
It's about our shared responsibility to build a more peaceful world.
A world where these kinds of tragedies are prevented. And I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah, I think so too.
We've covered a lot of ground, and it's clear that the situation in the Middle East is incredibly complex. But I hope that by taking this deep dive into the news, we've been able to shed some light on the human cost of this conflict, and maybe even inspire some of you to learn more and to get involved in the search for peace.
Absolutely.
So until next time, thanks for listening.